What's up, YouTube? Marco Presco here. And something I was thinking about the other day was homelessness, right? And, I was thinking, is homelessness a failure of the system or a failure of the individual, right? And so when I really started thinking about what if it's actually necessary for how the function of the system operates, right? So the resources exist, but what if it benefits to keep a working class of people in extreme poverty? I mean, if homelessness was a tool, you can keep wages low, you can keep rent high, you can keep workers desperate. And so, what if homelessness still exists because it's not meant to be solved? And here are my thoughts about potentially if this is true or not. To my first point of if I think homelessness is intentional, right? I was thinking the fear of homelessness could create compliance in the workforce. If losing a job meant only a temporary setback with guaranteed housing and healthcare, people wouldn't accept these low wages, these bad conditions, these exploitive jobs, because homelessness is always a looming threat. That's why people accept these like long pay, these long hours, and poor benefits because there's not really an alternative, right? And so Karl Marx had an idea of reserve army of labor, in which is the idea that a pool of unemployed and desperate workers help keep wages down. And this makes sense into today's age. When people are replaceable, they don't have leverage. And with, the increasing of jobs being laid off and decreasing of AI, if there's no homelessness or job insecurity, workers could demand better pay and working conditions, right? But for the past, you know, 10, if not longer, 20 years, everything has increased in price except wages. Amazon warehouses are infamous for their grueling working conditions, but people keep working there because they can't afford to quit. Like Starbucks, McDonald's, Walmart all rely on underpaid workers with no safety net. You might get a couple of stocks here and there and a couple of benefits, but overall, like it's not much. Especially when you see how much they're making per year as the company as a whole, how much they're actually paying their employees relative to gross profit. You know, homelessness can serve as a constant threat. To keep workers, forcing them to accept any job, no matter how bad it is, right? And in the U.S., we prioritize landlords and investors over housing for all people. I read somewhere in 2022 there's like 17 million vacant homes, but only 600,000 homeless people. Um, and I don't know the statistic right now, but this is kind of where it sparked my interest, because if homelessness is really about a lack of housing, like this wouldn't be a problem, right? So there's a discrepancy here. There's something wrong. Um, and real estate speculation makes um, housing more scarce, and this is intentional. If they if investors and corporations buy up these homes and leave them empty to drive, leave them empty, then it can increase property values, right? Because there's a supply and demand. If you control all the supply, then demand will increase. You can charge higher prices. you know Airbnb, corporate landlords have turned these affordable housing options into luxury rentals. Um, and there's certain zoning laws and anti-homeless policies that make it illegal to build low-cost housing in many areas. For example, like in Los Angeles is somewhere where I know they have like tens of thousands of vacant lots, while it has one of the highest homeless populations on the streets. Some in San Francisco, bunch of luxury high-rise apartments sit half empty, but the city refuses to put house homeless residents in them. Um, so maybe like if it could be homelessness isn't a lack of housing, but a lack of affordable housing. But by keeping people unhoused, they benefits the landlords, the developers, and the investors because their property isn't going down in value if they have like a homeless population in there. Another point I was thinking about is like, why is homelessness criminalized and not solved? With all the money spent on policing the homeless, right? Why not just use that money to house them instead? Instead of using funds for housing, cities spend millions of dollars on police sweeps, anti-homeless architecture, and criminalizing homelessness. And it costs money to, you know, jail a homeless person. Like, I'm not sure how much money it is, but every time you get arrested, that's somebody else's money that has to go through like the lawyers and the time spent driving that police officer to the jail, and it costs money to house people in jails. Um, San Francisco spent, I believe, like 21 million in 1 year on homeless sweeps. That could be used for other things. Um, and New York and LA have passed anti-camping laws that criminalize sleeping outside, and they have one of the highest like homeless populations. Both those two cities, I believe, they're the top two, if I'm not mistaken, which makes sense because they're one of the two biggest cities. Um, and so like we install like these spikes on like benches and remove public restrooms and make bus stops uncomfortable to sleep on, but this doesn't really solve homelessness. It just like makes it less visible to the public. And instead of like fixing homelessness, we try to make it invisible, but that isn't solving it. But if you're not trying to solve it, then that means it's not a priority for you, right? So thinking about like social programs, um, shelters and short-term aid keep people in the system. They provide temporary relief, and these camps are essential, but they don't offer long-term housing or stability. You know, there's like barriers to welfare programs that make it hard for them to leverage and use. Um, you know, Permanent housing solutions have been proven to work, but they receive less funding than temporary shelters, which doesn't make sense. Finland is a country that virtually ended homelessness by providing homes. While the U.S. continues to fund expensive temporary solutions that don't fix the issue, and that's partially because the U.S. doesn't like to look for other countries for their programs and solutions. We're all about our rights. We're all about us being right, and we want to do things our way. Um, but if social services like actually solve homeless, like would that put them out of business? That's something I was thinking about. Uh, and so homelessness, serves like a warning to everyone else, right? Like looking at a homeless person is like looking in a mirror. You don't like think about, oh, what has this, like, who is this person, like what's his name, where's he from. You think about where you are compared to that person. Like, wow, I'm glad I'm not living like that, or I'm glad I'm not on the street, or I'm glad I got these clothes, or I got this food, I'm glad I'm not hungry, right? Now a lot of times you don't even see these homeless people for who we are, even though like most people are one crisis away from like homelessness, right? A medical emergency, a job loss, a financial setback. um, we don't see homeless people for what they are, who they are. We see them, how much better we have it in comparison, and this might install fear. Like if you don't work hard enough, if you don't conform, if you don't keep pushing, you can end up like them. And this keeps people trapped in things that they hate, because and afraid to take risks, and constantly working just to survive, just not to end up like these individuals. The U.S. has the money, the resources, and housing to end homelessness. And public policy, getting into policies like, we have a very bureaucratic system. There's 50 states. You have three levels. You have state level, federal level, um, local level. So it's hard to like implement something that will work. But I just feel like we're not doing enough. If if we have the money, resources, and housing to end homelessness, like why hasn't it done yet? If other countries like Finland have proven that homelessness can be solved, why haven't we done that? And like I feel like there's more benefits. If I'm thinking in the mind of, uh, you know, a rich guy, like if I can keep, or a CEO of a corporation, like if I can keep wages low, workers afraid, housing expensive, um, then like why would I want to like decrease homelessness? Um, and so another concept I have is this, this illusion of help that we have, that we have these resources, right? So now these services and these resources aren't built to solve the problems, but they're built to manage them, right? And that can explain why we send so much money to these issues, but we're not attempting to solve them, we're attempting to manage them. And we can keep people barely surviving but never thriving. There's profit and poverty, prisons, social programs, and charities. All these things depend on people staying poor. Um, like there's research not in just other countries, but I think there's like a program called Housing First, which actually has evidence that to reduce homelessness, you need permanent housing programs, but our funding goes to shelters instead. Um, and these shelters are overcrowded, they're underfunded, they're like not safe. Um, and these just don't provide real solutions for people. Um, and even like we have this thing, the welfare cliff effect, because basically like you know many low income people lose their benefits once they earn slightly more money. You know, because like imagine like a single mother on food stamps, right? Who gets like a small raise, maybe she gets like 5K more in her paycheck, but now she just lost like her food stamps because she made a slight bit more money. You know, and so this can keep can keep people in a cycle of low wages and reliance on assistance, because you're reliant on this assistance. But if you do anything about this to get out of it, then you know it's not enough to overcome the assistance that you're making. And which is why it creates an incentive for people not to work, for people to be lazy, for people to be relying on the government. Um, and we spend over $1 trillion on social programs, but like how much of that goes to administration? How much of that goes to bureaucracy? How much of that goes to temporary relief rather than structural fixes? And so like we have this myth in the United States that it's people's personal responsibility for why they're homeless, replacing like structural accountability. You know, we ask like, why don't homeless people just get a job? Or I hear things like, why don't they try harder? Why don't they stop being lazy? Rather than asking like, why is housing unaffordable? Why are wages stagnant while rent skyrockets? Why do landlords get bailed out but the tenants don't? You know, and so we have like a system that blames the individual, because like what happens if we admit systemic failure? You know, and if housing was a human right, then like would landlords be able to charge whatever they want? You know, the threat of homelessness keeps rent high. People pay absurd amounts to avoid it. I mean, I don't want to be homeless. It's cold. I live in New Jersey. Like, I'm not trying to be outside. Um, if I have, if I can keep housing scarce, like I said, supply and demand, more people are going to want it because there's less available. Um, and I guess like I feel like also the media manipulates how we see homelessness, right? I'm constantly, well, a lot of the times I'm shown drug addicts and mentally ill people, and I very few see like families, veterans, or just full-time workers who can't afford rent. And I feel like a lot of times we're told homelessness is a choice instead of like policy failure. Um, like even on the news, like there's like, oh, homelessness is skyrocketing, but like why is housing unaffordable? Like why isn't that on the news? Talk about more. Um, and so like the way we see homelessness is engineered to make us feel superior instead of empathetic, and that's like a problem, a U.S. problem that I feel like that we have. And so the real question is homelessness by design? If we have enough homes, why are people homeless? If we can afford, you know, corporate bailouts, why can't we afford housing for all? If we know how to end homelessness and we've seen other countries who have been able to do so, why haven't we done it? And I think this is the type of conversation that I want people to, rethink everything. I want people to, I don't know. I could be wrong. I could have, weak points, but these are just my thoughts about like homelessness. Like it just doesn't make sense like why we can't solve it. And and these are just all the reasons I came up with why we might have homelessness in the United States. So appreciate everybody for listening to me speak about homelessness. I know it's not very applicable, but it's something like serious and something that I've been thinking about and just wanted to share. So thank you.